Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Planning Board meeting for February 15th, 2022. My name is Carrie Marnick. I'm the Planning Board Chair. Before we get started, I'm going to read a few announcements. This open meeting with the Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of June 16th, 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. All members of the Planning Board are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows the Planning Board to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting may feature public comment. At this point, I will confirm that members and persons anticipated on the agenda are remotely present. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Anthony Zaitin?
Here.
Amy Paretsky?
Here.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Fred Litchfield?
Here.
Bob Federico?
Here.
Great. Ground rules for the meeting. For presenters and applicants listed on the agenda, the chair will invite each speaker or applicant on the agenda by name to make a presentation and speak to their application. Participants will provide their full name and hold until their name is called. Each speaker will be asked to mute their phone or computer when not speaking and to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate meeting minutes. Those responding will be asked to wait until the floor is yielded to them by the chair. Speakers who wish to respond to the comments of others do so through the chair, taking care to identify themselves. Each vote taken by the board or committee will be conducted by a roll call vote. For items of public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford comments as public comment as follows. By phone, dial *9 to raise your hand and wait to be recognized by the chair. Please note the part of your phone number will be visible to those viewing the meeting. By Zoom, click raise hand on the bottom of your screen and wait to be recognized by the chair. The chair will ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses only. Once the chair has a list of all public commentators, the chair will call on each by name and afford approximately 3 minutes to any comments. This evening, we do not have executive session, so I think that is the end of the announcements. With that, why don't we get started with the agenda? First item on our agenda, Norm Corbett is joining us from the NHDC with a draft of the preservation plan. So Norm, with that, would you like to bring up your plan and we'll get started on the discussion? Oops,
There we go. I'm not muted now.
So
So what's the best approach, Carrie? I sent it out in advance. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to review it, or do you want me to just kind of go through it? I'll try to skim it, so it won't take a crazy amount of time, but what would you like me to do, Carrie?
I did have a chance to read it and I sent it to everybody, but I think it would still be helpful if you don't mind bringing it up and just highlighting some of the areas that you wanted to focus on. I know you highlighted a certain section that you thought was most relevant and important, so maybe just help put it in context for us a little bit.
No problem. We can do that. Let's see if I did this right. Let me know if you're seeing the table of contents.
Yes, but it's super small.
Super small. We don't want that. So tell me when, how are we doing now?
Oh, that looks good. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
All right.
Perfect.
So this is the table of contents for our preservation plan. So it's a full document and it has a lot of different sections, but right now I'll call them in a rough draft. They're really not ready for the public to look at. We're still working out the kinks. But the section I really want to highlight tonight is highlighted here. This would be chapter 7, which really is the preservation plan. Everything else is history about the town. There's a variety of other things like that. But this is what we're going to review tonight, the historic preservation plan for the town of Northborough. And there's 7 different parts to it. So let me pull that one up. Here we go. So we can see all that, section 7.
I still see the highlight, just the highlighted area.
All right, so let me do this. I always get trapped up a little bit with the sharing. I need to go, oops. So that's what you're looking at. Okay, I'll stop the share and then I'll do it this way. That seems to be the only way I get to do it without having too much trouble. So,
And then while you're working on that, Jim, I think Millie said she was calling in I don't know if you see any phone numbers.
Yep, I'll keep an eye out. What's the last 3 digits of her phone number?
Let's see. Looks like 511.
511.
So,
Great.
yep, I
So
see that come in. And I sent her the link again. She said the room access code wasn't working.
interesting. Okay, yeah, I sent her one to her her personal email address as well. And then if she calls in, she won't be able to be pulled in as a panelist, but I'll be able to do allow to talk. So she'll be able to hear you, and then you'll be able to hear her as well.
Okay, great. All right, Norm, it looks like you have it figured out
I
here.
figured it out. Excellent.
Right.
So again, this is the plan. Our plan is based on the master plan. When the master plan was completed, we realized, oh, this is the right time for us to get a historic preservation plan in order because of all the work of the master plan. If you remember, I think it was chapter 7 has to do with the history part of the town and goals and recommendations. So the way it's working when I go through this, it's all based on the master plan. We use master plan nomenclature throughout the whole thing to have continuity with that document. So the master plan, if you remember, it identified goals that we would want to obtain, and then it has recommendations to achieve those goals. Those recommendations are quite general. So what we've gone through now is we want to have specific tasks that will obtain those goals, and that's really what our participation is on this plan. You're going to see there's a lot more detail from a historic preservation perspective. And we use the same time, there's a time frame on the activities, and we use the same logic that was being used in the master plan. There's ongoing, as needed, short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And those are also based off the master plan nomenclature. And when we go down to timing, you'll see anything in green is the master plan timing, and anything in purple is the historic preservation plan task timing. All right? So let's these are the different resources we use for the plan. I won't go through all of them. Again, obviously, master plan is the first one. The other one I wanted to highlight is there was a community preservation plan done in 2015, and it also identified what's the best use of CPA money for historic preservation. So that was also used. And then a variety of other things that we got from the Mass Historical Commission and other documents we had on hand. We're trying to highlight that if anything needs to be done in this plan is the number one is education. And the reason for that is right down in here. I think I can just highlight this. It's for any preservation using Historic Community Preservation Act funding and any installation of any local historic district, it requires a town meeting vote. So what we need to make sure is that the town meeting understands and appreciates what we're trying to do. Without that education, we'll certainly get a lot of negative votes. Anytime you want to put a property on the National Register or put a preservation restriction on that property, it really is driven by the owner. It's not something we can slap on somebody's house. It doesn't work that way. So we have to educate owners of antique properties to see if they would like to put these kinds of protections and recognitions on their property. And finally, if the house is going to be developed, so if a housing lot's going to be developed and step one is to tear it down, what we would prefer is to find, at least talk through with the developer and the owner and see if there are opportunities to preserve the property, especially some unique properties. So that's where we feel education is key. It's ongoing, and that's why we listed it as number one, because everything is based on participation and education of the citizens. So we'll go to the references, and this just explains how we're doing the reference to the Northborough Master Plan. If you remember, when the master plan, we have this nomenclature for the different recommendations. So N is natural, C cultural, historic, goal number 3. Recommendation number 2, and that's what we're using as we go through our procedures for what we think is the preservation plan. There were 4 parts of the plan, the master plan, that are of interest that we go in detail. One is maintaining and expanding the protection of Northborough's historic resources. That is the core of our effort. The other 3, repurposing surplus town buildings, coordinating efforts among cultural and historical organizations, preserving and enhancing natural landscapes are all key, but the primary one that we'll be focusing on is this one that I've highlighted right here. And it's NCH2. We're starting with the recommendation 2. So first thing is preparing a historic preservation plan. That's what we're doing. We like it in the short term. We hope to have this out before town meeting. So we're looking at that kind of a June timeframe. The next step is promoting an awareness of the town's history. So we'll highlight a few of those steps. We've been publishing some local history articles in the community newspaper and on social media. We want to continue that. We want more and more people to recognize the history of the town. We do a lot of collaboration with the Historical Society. They're an unbelievable resource for the town. Their archives and their knowledge, pretty much everything we do, anything we write, anything we put on signs, all uses information from the Historical Society. So we need to continue to work with them on a lot close cooperation. We want to continue installing historic markers around town and interpretive signage, because people walk by properties now, they can actually read about it and recognize what that local property has to do with local history. We have a list of possible signage that we would want to implement over the next few years. We write letters of appreciation. We started doing that a couple of years ago when we find that a homeowner has upgraded their property. So they recognize we appreciate that they either repainted it or fixed it up. They've improved their property, and it makes it more of a visual appearance to the nice visual appearance for the town. Things we haven't done and we'd like to find out how to do is to work with the Northborough school systems. The Historical Society already does this, so this is again this cooperative effort we want to work with. But there's I personally would like to find a way to get the Northborough High School involved, either some kind of projects or programs, and get the school a little bit of buzz with some of the local history. We'd also like to look at possibility with something with the cable access director, do a program on history or several. There's a lot of committees we really need to start interacting more with. Certainly the Master Plan Implementation Committee is key, but we're finding that the conservation is very important with us, Conservation Committee, the Planning Board, of course, and even trails. So there's a variety of other, and as we go through this, you'll see there's a lot more interactions we really need to start to have with the different committees in our town and even in other towns. One that popped up, came up recently, and actually we had a meeting with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and really what came out of it is there was a lot of Northborough history that has to do with inclusion, and there's a lot of books about the town that have that topic included. And some of the things are, inclusion, or how the indigenous peoples were treated when the colonists first came, the whole abolition movement in the town of Northborough, women's suffrage, local immigration. I mean, if you look at the history of Northborough, after the original English immigrants, there were the Irish, there was the French, and now we have a real multi-international community. And how did we grow into that? So that's one of the things that came out of the Diversity and Inclusion Committees, finding ways to address those topics. They're actually pretty interesting topics too. So that has to do with education and awareness. So this particular task here is to promote the protection of the properties. And when we say properties, you have to think outside of buildings, because it's easy to just think of buildings. There are archaeological sites in town. There are structures that should be considered. Documents is one that we're going to pop up a few times because we really want to learn how to preserve documents. Several years back, Andy Dowd, the town clerk, did a really good program to preserve some of the key old documents in the town. The artifacts, landscapes, agricultural lands, there's a variety, is much more than just a building and a property. There's a lot of other things that can be protected. So in the first one is in 2008, 2009, we had a company come in and do a historic assets inventory of the town of Northborough. There's about 360 assets that are now located, that have been identified and on record with the Massachusetts Historical Commission. We stopped that inventory around 1910. From a from the Massachusetts Historical Commission, anything older than 50 years should be considered to be inventoried. So that's something that we need to consider, looking at properties between 1910 and 1970 and see which ones are not on the inventory and could be. It's just a real way of recognizing the antiques in town. And that basic information helps guide us for other aspects. So we want to use that basic information to see, which property should be on the National Register, which property should be, which possible structures and objects can be on the National Register. It also has a guide in terms of what historic district recommendations there are. Now, we already have a lot of this information for 2008, 2009 database, but we should start to look and see what might be available in more recent history. And I won't scroll down now, but every time we have a table, it's because we have a list of items of activities that we should be considering. The community preservation plan that was done in 2015 said if there was anything that we were lacking for preservation, was the lacking in the preservation of historic documents. And although the town hall did a great with the town records, I think we need to actually go to some of these old religious organizations and see what they might have that should be preserved, and especially the Historical Society. I mean, their archives, we need to work with them and see what in this art, when you look at preservation, you're saying what in these archives you want to make sure don't get damaged or destroyed, and what can we do to make sure that that's protected or duplicated. Before Mia left, I had conversations with her about open space and woodlands, because you have to consider that a lot of the Northborough property, the lands themselves are either, certainly there were Native American lands at first, but when colonial times came, they became farmlands, they became woodlots, they became old meadows. So in the preservation of these lands, we want to think of the fact that they are historical properties, and we can put a spin on some of these preservations that have to do with history. So Mia was very helpful to guide me to understand how these approaches are done, what the open space and conservation commissions and committees have done in the past. And again, this is one of the committees we should be working with as lands are trying to be protected. We can always help incorporate some of the historical perspective on that. We'd like to have an archaeological reconnaissance survey of the town. We've never had one. Many of the local towns have. And this is really to see what sections of the town may have not been, so I get this right, what sections of the town have not been disturbed so that there may be some archaeological features in them. Now, certainly the most famous one, and it's very famous, is the Mastodon site in Northborough. That is a very famous site, and that's an example of an archaeological feature that needs to be recognized. And a reconnaissance survey is really to just go through the properties of the town and see where, what part of towns might still have some of these features left. There was a very active native population in this area. And if you even go to Westboro, or if you go to Marlborough, they have a lot of archaeological sites left over from the Native American days. Another thing is Vietnam War memorials. There's none for Revolutionary War. There is none for Spanish-American War. There's also other conflicts that we don't have memorials for. And it's something we probably could work with some of the veterans organizations to see if we should incorporate some of these. Because they are very important. They're what our ancestors did to keep us free. And if anything, the Historic District Commission over the past 5 to 8 years has focused on cemeteries in the town of Northborough. And there's still a few loose ends that we want to finish up. So one is the Brigham Street Burial Ground. And we requested funding now from CPA, which will be voted on hopefully at town meeting, to remove some dead trees and put up some fencing. Just a little bit of history on this Brigham Street Burial Ground. Most people in town don't know it's there. Many of the neighbors, certainly in the past, did not know it was a burial ground. It was used for yard waste and the like. We now know there's between 40 and 60 burials there of the ancestors from the 1740s of colonial ancestors. So we really need to make sure people recognize it's a burial ground, appreciate our ancestry, and respect the land. That's really the key thing on that particular property. For the Howard Street Cemetery, we're in the process of getting it on the National Register. And the reason for that, there's a couple of reasons for that, but one is a financial reason for that, because we really would like to fix a lot of those broken and crooked grave markers in the Howard Street Cemetery. And that will be a very expensive proposition. So by getting it on the National Register, we can have the state very thankfully pay for half of it. As some of you may be aware of, the Wachusett Aqueduct, when it was originally built, it was built for pedestrian traffic. And obviously over time, that's not been possible. And I know the Trails Committee would like to reopen it for that again. And I'd like to work closely with them for that, because the potential some funding, some state funding for preservation on the aqueduct from a historical perspective. Let's see. As I mentioned before, expanding the historic assets inventory. As I mentioned, all the assets up to 1910 were covered, but now we have between 1910 and 1950 that we should be looking at. Actually, it's 1972, I think, that we should be looking for. And the final part of this section, which, again, this is the core part of our effort, is we need to find a way to incentivize restoration and rehabilitation, especially for homeowners. How can we encourage them to invest in the preparation and preservation of their properties? So one of the part of the education is we really need to learn a lot about tax incentives. How do tax incentives work with restoration and preservation properties? How does that all come together? One of the particular topics is downtown Main Street. How do we get an incentive to work with the owners of the antique properties on downtown Main Street to keep the properties up? Is there a way we can fund some of the exterior work? Is there a variety of things we can do to help them if they have some financial challenges? So, and there are even ways of doing that with CPA funding, but again, it's part of it is for us to learn how to use CPA funding as an incentive for grants for historic properties. I know it's been done in several other towns. I think it's something we all have to learn and find a way of getting CPA fundings for private homes for exterior work. It's tricky, but I think there are ways of doing that. We just need to understand how that will all work. Such things like, as you remember, the Good Gale store a couple of years ago, the Habitat for Humanity did a restoration project on that to make it into affordable housing. That's a classic example of how do we work with people like the Habitat for Humanity to do this for other properties. There's also something called the Massachusetts Preservation Projects Fund, which is good for historic properties, and they'll fund half of a project. And how do we address that with businesses, anybody that needs some kind of work done on the property? So that section I just reviewed is really probably 90% or more of what we have as a plan. The other ones are not so they're one items. They're not quite the same as extensive work. But this one here is repurposing town surplus buildings. So in this case, we've made a list of what they are. It's White Cliffs, the old fire station, current town hall, the replica of the 1867 town hall, which is for West Main, the current fire station, which will be vacated, the Boundary Street land, which the town owns 58 acres. Is there something that should be done with that from a historical perspective? And then Westboro State Hospital grounds in Northborough, some of it may be available for purchase. Our role in this is really to participate in any of these topics. We're not the driving force for any of these. So for example, White Cliffs is driven by the White Cliffs Committee. So we're participating in it, but we don't the Northborough Historic District Commission isn't the driver. Let's see. So this one here, these goals come right out of the master plan. Where appropriate, utilize surplus municipally owned properties as community spaces. So we say, sure, where appropriate, we agree to this goal. Another goal was identify and support reuse efforts for town-owned historic properties. Again, we don't drive this one, but we really would agree to this goal and we will assist as appropriate. This part has really to do with getting more exposure to what the other organizations and committees do in town. And even, so the Historical Society, of course, but the library, Trails Committee, Open Space. These are things we really haven't interacted with as much as we could. Also, schools, religious organizations, and local businesses. There's a lot of opportunity there that we can start tapping into. This was one that wasn't in the master plan, but we came up with and realized it's important. It's really these, the historic district commissions and the historical commissions are in every town around us. We haven't been interacting with them. The fact of the matter is they're going through the same struggles and that we are in terms of trying to get people to accept, people to recognize what the historic culture is and how to preserve it. I've talked to people in Shrewsbury several times and on occasion with Marlborough, but I think we should somehow formalize our interactions with these groups. This task was recommended by a VHB, becoming a certified local government. I don't know what that means, and when we have a new town planner on board, I think it's a conversation we need to have. Is it something we should do? Is it something we have to do? And really, what are the benefits of that? That's clearly an unknown for us at this point. There's a line item here which has to do with the historic homes along Main Street. So that's been hit several times, and we know that's a critical one. I mean, if you look at these historic homes from the Assabet River to the center of town, they're all very well kept. They're all beautiful homes. And how do we make sure that we can get some longevity to that type of care in the properties? So hiring interns is a possibility to have us help us with some of our work, if we can get some grant funding for that. This part is the natural landscapes of the community. This was, Mia helped us with this. So these particular tasks right here, all of these tasks come right out of the master plan for natural landscapes. And again, our involvement is the fact that most of those natural landscapes still have a historic twist on them. And how do we interact and get that as part of the plan? These are all the references we used for getting this together. There's a lot of information out there. I won't go through the tables unless you want me to. At this point, I just wanted to get an overview. What are we missing? Is there something we just haven't put into this plan? What our goal is, you're only seeing section 7, the details of the plan. What I hope is in about 3 months' time, we'll put the whole plan together as a full, complete draft, get it back in your hands, and then ask you to comment on the package. So anything else you want to see or anything you want to discuss, just raise your hand.
Okay, great. Thanks, Norm. Looks like an enormous amount of work, and thank you to you and the entire commission for putting this together. This looks amazing. Do board members have questions or comments at this point based on what was presented? And Millie joined us, by the way, looks like by phone. So Millie Milton is present for the purpose of the minutes.
Can you guys hear me?
We can. Yep. Hi, Millie.
Hi.
Millie, anything you'd add as a representative on the committee?
No, I know Norm has, and we've been working on it pretty steadfastly. So I think it's pretty detailed and thorough at this point.
Any questions or thoughts? Oh, Amy, sorry, I can't see everybody, so feel free to.
Oh, that's okay. It was just quick. I read through it too, and it looks really great. It looks like a lot of work went into it, and I couldn't see anything that was missing. It seemed really good, really well written.
Well, thank you, Amy. We appreciate that. This is the first time the town has a historic preservation plan. That surprised me. So you'll see in the parts that you haven't seen yet, a lot of history of what the town has done on its own for history preservation, and there's actually been a lot done without having a formal preservation plan in place.
Anthony, anything from you?
No, it looks very thorough, and mirror what everybody else said. It looks like a lot of work went into it. Look forward to seeing the final document.
All right. Well, if something comes up, just email me, because just don't want to leave a big void and realize, oops, how did we forget that one?
So I actually do have a couple of things, just from me. Millie, did I interrupt you? Were you going to say something?
No, I'm all set.
Okay, so is there anything that this board can do to support this? So I know in the beginning we talked about, are there any bylaws that help you? As you had mentioned, you know, there are established historic districts in town, and you shared the bylaw that supports that, and I see that it's established. And you mentioned, I see in the bylaw there are some sign guidelines and things like that. But is there anything this board can do to help support your plan with any sort of bylaw or guidelines or anything like that?
You know, that's what's missing. Yes, there are some things. There are different approaches to saving street views. It doesn't always have to be like local historic district to preserve the frontage of an old home. There are other ways of doing bylaws I've heard of and have not investigated. So I think the board could be really helpful with that, because there are, as I said, like there's different ways of skinning a cat kind of a thing. And I think there will be down the road some reason to think through the best approach of this.
Okay, Amy, you have something to that, or a different?
Yeah, I know a long time ago, Main Street Residential, where most of those houses were, in the bylaw, it said like if there were duplexes, they can only do by conversion, which meant the footprint stayed the same and the exterior of the building stayed the same, but the inside could change. So you can make it a 2-family house, and that may help preserve some of the homes. Right now, we allow duplexes by special permit. So depending on the board, they could say conversion only or not conversion only, but I do know there was a footnote in previous bylaws, and it got taken out, that Main Street Residential could only allow duplexes by conversion only. And that may help to put that back in. So say a future board would have a duplex in front of them, and they could say, you know, how about conversion only, where you have to keep the outside exterior of the building, you have to keep the same footprint. We also allow, in certain districts, we allow multifamily housing, and it's not allowed right now in Main Street Residential, even though a lot of those houses are 4 and 5 units. I don't know if that's something Norm and the historic preservation would think might help in the future, like to allow, if they preserve the outside of the building, maybe it could allow 2 or 3 units just to help preserve the building so they don't tear it down.
Well, that if that was ended up being a local historic district, the local historic district, for example, only has, and I don't want to use the word control because it's not the right word, but only has can only recommend anything that's exterior that you can see from the street. So
Yeah.
I guess so. Our basic philosophy is, is to have to view, to be able to walk down the street and view an architecture that is representative of what was there. Frankly, we don't want control. We don't have interest of what's going on inside the building. That's a whole different area that purists sometimes want to go that route, but I have to give my own opinion on it. Is I don't really care what's going on inside, but I do like to be able to save the street view. And that's the term they use, the street view.
Mhm. Even as part of the master plan, we have that downtown visualization study. I don't know if there's an element of that that's almost, what do we visualize in our historic districts? What do we think of when we think of historic areas in other towns that we would want to replicate? Or I don't know if there's any of that in there. I don't think it needs to be a whole separate study, but maybe it's an element of the study that we do. What do our historic districts look like for people?
Well, I haven't been following the implementation plan very closely, but I think they decided to my understanding is correct, that one of the first items is to try to address the downtown district. And I would hope that when they hire somebody, like if it is VHB or whoever it would be, would consider incorporate the historic homes and how should they be addressed in any downtown restoration. And I mean, there's two parts of downtown. There's saving what we have and then thinking what we want 15, 20 years from now.
Right, right.
I know from being on the committee, there are going to be surveys that go out, and there's going to be public hearings and public meetings to get input from residents. So they're going to do the study and the visualization on the feedback they get. So it'd be important, maybe we'll announce it on the planning board. We can let you know, and you can announce it to historical. You know, it'd be important to get feedback from all different people on what they want to see. So
Yeah.
if nobody brings it up, then they won't probably incorporate it. But I guess if we get a lot of feedback from people and interest, then it will be incorporated.
And then timing wise, if you do need bylaw support, I don't know what that looks like from your perspective. Is that perhaps next year or the year after? I know we went through an exercise at one point where we're talking about possible bylaws, and we shared some from other towns. And if that's an avenue we need to take, obviously this year that we decided not, and that was with your feedback as well, to not pursue that. But is that something we should think about for next year, or is that tough to say at this point?
You addressing me for that question?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
It's okay. It's just hard to see eye contact.
Yeah.
I think for downtown, I think that the thing is to see how any consultant comes in, has recommendations, because they'll have a better exposure to different towns than we would.
Yep.
And I think, well, we have Millie, thank God, we have Millie on that committee. So, you know, with Millie participating with us, we'll be on top of it. And that's the main thing right now, is to just be aware of what's going on.
Yep. Okay. And one other thing that was mentioned when you talked about preserving antique properties, and we had talked a little bit about this too, like how can we work together to help? And maybe that's a part of when the new planner comes on with the application process and figuring out, like giving you that lead time you need to make that contact and help preserve these properties before we're in the situation of demolition. So did you want to talk about that?
I guess I don't understand the process in detail well enough. The way, so what we're discussing here is a demolition request for an antique property. And the way the process works right now is we only formally get notified of a demolition when a actual demolition request is put into Bob, to the building inspector. Then we're notified. But it depends on the savvy, essentially, of the developer. Some of the ones in town that have done this many times, well, we get notification of the request for demolition right from the get-go, way early in the process. And then we obviously they have some plans, but at least we have the opportunity to discuss with them, you know, why are they doing it? How this is all working together. We get it early on because they know that that's the best case. But we seem to have some other developments in town that the demolition is waited on, and the challenge we have is by time we see it, when the demolition request is put in front of us, they've already gone through design review. It's already been accepted. There's a lot of things that have already been done in advance, and at this point we're like, well, it's hard to make a convincing argument that maybe you don't want to, you haven't given any other considerations, and that's the hiccup we see once in a while. It's not a bad thing. It's just that it's something's not, the ducks aren't quite in a row the way we would have liked to have seen them.
Yep. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments or anything, Norm, that you wanted to add?
No, tonight I just wanted to let you know what we're up to, and if there's and now I see that we don't have in there. I need a couple sentences that say we need to work with the planning board to look at options for bylaws, and that'll go in there now.
Well, it sounds like, did you need sometimes what we'll do for plans is we'll do a planning board endorsement. Did you want us to do a roll call vote for an endorsement of the plan? So you have that, or
No, not at this point. When you
Okay.
get the full document, then I think it would be beneficial to have that support, but I think it's too early now.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you. I appreciate all you do. And I love the markers. That's one of my favorite things. When I see them now, I love to read all the information on them. I think it's really interesting. So thank you for your hard work.
Oh,
Any
very
other-
good. Have a
Yeah.
good rest of the meeting and take care.
All right. Thanks
Thanks
so
for
much.
letting me in. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Norm.
Thanks, Norm.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Millie, do we still have you? Yep, I see you there. Okay, so Millie, you're going to stay on via phone.
Yes.
All right, so in terms of, let's see, the bylaws, that's next on our list. I want to make sure you can be part of, do you have access to the documents that we've received so that you can kind of follow the conversation, or how can we help you have what you need so you are?
I think I have most of the documents at this
Okay.
point,
Okay, great.
I hope.
All right. So what I thought we could do is when we last left off, we had, we went through all of our bylaws. We had some discussion. We had some points, some questions for council that we wanted to get clarified. Town council was able to get back to us with some of our answers and provided some feedback on the actual bylaws, each bylaw itself. So we have both answers to questions where there were questions and then specific feedback on each bylaw. So I think at this point, for the ones that we can get through, I think there are still a few outstanding items on some of them, but why don't we at least get through just that next iteration so we can kind of keep the process moving and then figure out, settle on our public hearing night so that people can ask questions and weigh in and all of that. So I'm going to start actually with the feedback on the moratorium / definitions.
Mhm.
So Millie, if you have that one pulled up.
Okay.
So basically for this, in terms of the questions that we asked town council related to the moratorium, hold on, let's see here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so we had asked about, hold on, I just need glasses. Okay, we had asked about whether or not we could create a committee as part of our bylaw. So if we were to go with moratorium, we asked, could we create a committee? And the reply was that that could be formed pursuant by authorization in the bylaw, and that it would further need to be approved. You know, the committee could be created once it was approved by the Attorney General. In the meantime, the planning board would be able to conduct research and studies and all of that. The committee piece would just have to hold until there was that final approval by the Attorney General. We also asked if staff could, if we needed to put in the bylaw specific staff members. And in that case, we could request input from staff who could do so without being members. So they could be participants without having to be defined in that bylaw. I think if you recall, we were talking about which, you know, do we want to have police or DPW or, you know, town planner, all of that. So we wouldn't necessarily have to name them in the committee. They could participate either way. Let's see. Those were the, oh, and then we had a question about should we specify both special permit and building permit? And he and town council said both were specified in the draft and he had kept that language. And that made sense. That was consistent with other moratoriums, bylaws that we had written, and we had included both on those. I think those are the questions. Any thoughts on that from board members, the responses or further clarification? Oh, I'm sorry, one more. There was a question of whether or not we could write this, if we had to write 2 different moratorium amendments or just one, because there were 2 uses involved. And the response was that a single moratorium on the related uses could be proposed. So does any further clarification needed on the questions? Amy.
Just have a quick one. Since he said that we have to wait for the Attorney General to approve before starting the committee. Should we just change that wording? I think it said within 30 days. Does it still say that?
Yes.
And maybe we'll say created, after Attorney General approval, or just however we want to reword it, because it might not be within 30 days. I don't know if that has to be changed or not.
So that's a good point. In the edits that Attorney Janeski made, he added the phrase of adoption of the moratorium.
Oh, okay.
So, yep. So within 30 days of Attorney General approval, or that thus the official adoption, then the committee could be formed.
All right, thanks. I have no other comments.
Okay. Other board questions or comments on that? Okay, in terms of edits that were made, so he went through and it looks like some wordsmithing that he suggested in terms of the moratorium. Let's see. The comment about the authorization of the committee not taking effect. However, the planning board could engage in studying the issues prior to that time. Let's see. That was it on the moratorium. And then I'm going to move on to definitions unless there's anything else. Did anyone have any comments on the edits that he had made to the document? Okay. Moving down to the definition. So as we talked about before, the thought process was perhaps we would put forward the moratorium and we'd have the definitions as backup if need be. We did not have specific questions about the definitions. However, Attorney Janeski made some comments. Similarly, he did some wordsmithing here on the document itself, but also added something of note that is up for board discussion. So what he added was that we would, by positioning warehouses with distribution, we would then eliminate the warehouse use. So previously it was just warehouse and storage, was it? Or just warehouse? I think it was warehouse and storage for them.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Okay. Okay, so previously we had warehouse and storage, now we have warehouse and distribution. It would eliminate the warehouse use. And then what may have, the restrictions proposed may end up creating non-conforming uses for the existing warehouses and storage facilities. So one suggestion was if the existing warehouse item is amended, as opposed to adding a new line for warehouse and distribution, that would eliminate warehouse without distribution from the bylaw. So the board would need to talk about, do we want to keep the original definition in there as well? And I think this requires maybe another round with town council just to verify. So I'm just gauging board. The conversation doesn't need to be our final component. I'm just gauging where the board heads at, so we know what our next steps are. We either need to consider the non-conforming uses or add that line back in, put warehouse back in, and add warehouse with distribution as a new component rather than editing the original component. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, I think it does, actually.
Okay.
I think the warehouse with distribution is different. And
Okay.
that captures, I think, what we're really trying to wrap our heads around.
So in that case, if we were to do that, sorry, Amy, I think I just cut you off by mistake. We would have to then, bless you. Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead, Amy. You can go with your
I
point.
guess what I'm confused on now is, so like Amazon and others came in under warehouse and they weren't warehouse with distribution, and it actually doesn't even have distribution in their definition. Now that we're going to have the regular warehouse and the warehouse with distribution, are those the ones that already passed going to be under the warehouse with distribution? Like, they were approved underneath the definition of warehouse without distribution. So I guess that's confusing to me. Like, something might have to go back to town council if if we're having warehouse with distribution, our old one is warehouse without distribution. How
Right.
did those fit in? You know, how did they get in? And how do they fit in? I don't know. It's confusing.
Was the old one warehouse without distribution or just warehouse or distribution and or?
Hold on.
Says warehouse, building for the storage, sorting, wholesale marketing of materials, merchandise, products, or equipment.
Right, but I guess I thought it had like a slash, I don't have the book with me that, but I thought it had a slash distribution. I could be wrong.
I'm on 738 for the I'm on the definition. I'm not at the table.
Okay,
There was a title, transportation and distribution uses, and underneath it is warehouse and another one called
Right.
trucking.
Okay.
So some of the ones that were actually approved probably should have been approved under parcel distribution facilities, but they came in as a warehouse, but then became a parcel distribution
Right.
facility.
Right. This gets back to the issue of not having it as someone declared. There was no use case for us to point to. We didn't know who the tenant was.
Right, yep. We didn't have the tenant, they came in under one thing, but now they're considered something else that we're actually adding into our table now, but we didn't have it before.
Okay, so the
Mhm.
question for council is, it sounds like if we are adding it and they actually fit into the new one and didn't ever fit into the old, I mean, that's kind of a tricky, what's the non-conforming use? I guess
Right.
we have to get to the bottom of.
Yep,
Okay. So wait, the original, back to that, 738 you said?
yes, that's what page. I'm on the 2019 book.
Yeah.
Page 738 is the definition.
Okay. So it's not really called warehouse with storage. Then the definition is storage. It's just straight warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in the use table, what's interesting in the use table is there's more uses than there are in the definitions for that one. Oh, no, there's not. Where's parcel? I thought we had parcel parcel distribution facility. Yes. So then in the use table, parcel distribution facility is there, but not in the definition. So in the definition, if everyone's following along, it says trucking, rail, or freight terminal. And in the use table, it adds or parcel distribution facility. So what did I do?
And that was before our time, so I don't know how that get added.
Okay, so then we have to make sure too, because we've pulled out parcel. All right, so we have to, I think this does require another round with council to figure out what are we doing, what are we creating for non-conforming based on where we were before? And how do we sort through? I mean, again, this almost lends itself into the case for moratorium in my mind, because we've got to not only unravel that, you know, some of these definitions we have comments from him that are worth maybe closer look as well. So for example, there was a comment about one of the definitions that could actually, the definition itself could result in more proposed facilities and possibly implicate interstate commerce issues. So I don't know how viable the definition solution is if we're going to start creating additional problems for ourselves without taking the time to really research it and make sure this is the right path for us. I don't know. Any thoughts on that for anyone who read the comments?
Well, maybe you're right. Maybe we should go just for the moratorium.
until we can get a better definition
Right.
or grasp.
I mean, these definitions were supposed to be from CMRPC and pretty good, but town council had issue with some of them. So we should figure out what his issue is and how we can avoid the problems.
Millie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that is wise to really make sure we have the right definition and understand what changes have what impact before we just throw that forward. I don't really see the harm in maybe re-presenting this after we have a little more time to look at it.
Yep. A little more time meeting a moratorium, or meaning after going back with council and at our next meeting?
I think more time, a moratorium, if we do that, if the town chooses to do that.
Okay. I mean, my overall
I just
concern,
wouldn't want to rush it.
yeah. One concern I have is that if we don't want to do a moratorium and we don't have our definitions in order, we have nothing protecting us.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
that's kind of too bad.
Yep, that is true.
Okay, at a minimum, it sounds like we need to go back to figure out what is the story with any sort of non-conforming uses, a little more clarification on his part and his comment about any sort of interstate commerce issues that could be created here.
Mm.
Which seems like it would be the case in any town creating these definitions. I mean, all of these trucks are not just traveling in state, I imagine. So I don't know how any town gets around this. Again, all part of things that we should have a better understanding of.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other thoughts on this one? Any other follow-up questions on this one? Okay. Moving on to the use variance. So let's see. For that, we had no further questions does anybody see? I don't see questions for that one that we had. However, Attorney Dineski reviewed the bylaw and suggested we add general provisions. And his comment for that was, since this section covers general rules on use regulations, it would be appropriate to include language there as well. So I had no issue with adding that. Did anyone have any comments or concerns with that?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. Okay, so next we had, let's see. Amy, did you want to speak to the brewery bylaw? We didn't have any specific questions on that, but I think Attorney Dineski reviewed the bylaw.
Sure. With that, there were definitions, a use table, and he thought it could be combined all into one bylaw, one warrant article. So once we just tweak a couple little things, he said he would put that together instead of having the definitions separate and the use table separate. He'll just combine it into one. He had some wording questions. I was going to use his terminology. He had a question about outdoor seating or outdoor dining. And I guess as a planning board, we can decide, do we want to call it outdoor seating or outdoor dining? To me, I think I would choose, I guess, outdoor dining because, I mean, you're sitting in a seat when you're outdoor dining. So,
That seems more inclusive.
yep. So he didn't really care which one we picked, outdoor dining or outdoor seating. But if we pick one, I'll let him know. And then he'll combine the definitions in the use table. And there really wasn't much else. He mentioned he wanted to add the word sellers after wholesale. And then I went back to him and mentioned how they're actually not distributing to sellers. They actually are the sellers. So he agreed with that. So, I mean, there weren't a lot of issues with this one. Once we decided on outdoor dining, he'll just merge it into one warrant article.
Okay, any thoughts from the board? Millie, it sounds like outdoor dining was your preference.
Yeah, I think that again is more descriptive and inclusive of what we're trying to get at.
Okay. Anthony? Oops, you're on mute.
No,
Anthony?
I'd agree with Millie on that one.
Okay, it's fine with me. I have no preference. Let's see. Otherwise, it looked like he helped with some edits. Any follow-up other than him combining, Amy, and that one piece of it? Any follow-up to this one?
No, I didn't have any follow-up, just I can make the updates on which one we choose and send it back to you, and then
Okay. Sign bylaw.
the sign bylaw, I had questions. For the most part, let me pull it up just for me. For the most part, he had some changes and I agreed with his changes. So I thought I could update the bylaw and send it back out to everybody with the final changes. But if I go through it really quickly, I asked, there was a section where we had no use variance a couple times. And I asked, can the no use variance be added under section C that would cover all the sections? And he agreed that it could stay there.
Mm-hmm.
When I go down, he updated the definition of flag. So I'll just stick with those updates. I'm just scrolling through. I had some questions about the window sign, and he felt that a window sign is allowed now if it's a decal, you know, that would say, or just a sign that says, say it's Amy's Sandwich Shop. So if it's a sticker or a sign that says Amy's Sandwich Shop, he felt it was allowed as a window sign. But I had a follow-up question to him. What about when people fill the windows with like Coke and cigarettes and Keno? And I'm just waiting back for a reply on that because I don't think that would be included as a window sign.
Okay.
The way he said it reads, not including merchandise or other products. So that's how he explained it. And then when I went down to the non-conforming section, he had a question with the non-conforming sign, which is removed or abandoned for longer than 30 days or destroyed by more than 35%. He had a question, was it the cost 35% or 35% of the physical sign? I actually found it both ways in certain towns. This one was Westboro. I think it was considering the physical sign. If more than 35% of it can't be replaced, then it has to be redone. I don't know if it matters. It seemed to make sense. Some towns did have a cost, but I don't know.
So wait, what was he recommending? Did he recommend one?
He didn't recommend either way.
Okay.
He just asked, is this 35% of the physical sign or 35% of the cost of the sign? And seeing some of the signs are old, I don't know if he's talking about the past cost or the future cost.
Okay.
So maybe we'll just keep it at,
Okay, so go ahead.
I don't
Millie.
even know how to really determine the cost at
Right.
that point.
Right. To me,
So
it's
the physical sign.
right.
the
Anthony.
most logical approach would be, to me, is the 35% of the size.
Yeah. Because all the other parameters on signs are pretty much the size, the height, the amount of space it covers. Never heard cost entered into that.
Right. I agree. And that's the way I was reading it, is not cost.
Okay.
I don't know if it has to be stated, but I didn't see, if it was cost, I saw it stated as cost in other towns. It says destroyed by more than 35%. So to me, that's the actual sign, the physical sign.
Yeah. Oh, Bob, do you have insight on that?
That's sure
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, I just got one question. What does a sign that looks like it's been damaged by 35%? What does it look like?
Right.
And how do I make that determination? Do I go out there and count the square inches and determine which ones are still okay and which ones aren't? If it's on a pole, you know, if the pole is standing but the sign is gone, is that 60% of the sign or is it 20% of the sign?
Right. It doesn't
I
talk
mean,
about the
if-
sign's
If
structure.
you're gonna go into the weeds, you've got to be very clear and very concise.
Okay, that's a good point, Bob. Thanks. Okay, so for that one, do we need further clarification on that one?
I think so. I think to Bob's point, that, you know, what if it is a sign that's 25 feet in the air or whatever, you know, unreachable, and how do you determine that 35%? To that point, I think it makes sense. It is kind of difficult to figure that one out. So maybe it needs just further clarification.
Okay.
I think like other bylaws, it's putting a number and then it would be up to Bob to, you know, make that determination. Like,
I
There-
won't do that.
right, there were quite a few.
You've
And
got
they
to
all
tell me
said
what I need to do.
35%.
Okay, if you're gonna go into this part of the weeds, you've got to tell me exactly what to do, just like we did with the measurement on the EMC signs 2 years ago. Okay, if I'm gonna be looking at this and you're splitting hairs between 35% and 50%, I would prefer to say, is it damage beyond repair? Or is it not?
I don't mind saying damage upon beyond repair. I just noticed it was general, and all the other towns I saw, it was 35%. I don't know why they picked it, but it was pretty standard. But we can change it to damage beyond repair if it makes more sense.
Well,
Bob.
to be
Since
honest
he's
with
the one who
you,
has to enforce it.
well, to be honest with you, you know, when I go to these inspectors meetings and the 75 inspectors in the room, I don't think we've ever had a discussion about how do we handle a partially destroyed sign,
Mhm.
ever. You know, it's either okay as is, or it's deemed unsafe by me, and it has to be replaced, okay? Which is what we currently have on the books, okay? If you look in the current sign bylaws, if there's a sign that's dilapidated, in danger of falling, you know, that sort of thing, I've got the ability and authority to order that sign to be fixed or replaced. Okay, so we already have something in terms of a, you know, obsolete, broken, potentially dangerous sign. You know, and, you know, currently it's a judgment call, you know, but like I said, I've never seen a 35% damaged sign. And I've never had a discussion with another building official talking about having to replace a sign that's 60% destroyed as opposed to 35% destroyed.
Mhm.
That's all I'm saying. It's, you know, it's really weedy in there.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Anything else? So there was one thing that in the comments here, or Amy, are you still going through, anything else of note?
Well, I've just got that far, but if you want to talk about,
Oh, no, go ahead, go ahead.
is it in that area?
No, I wasn't following along necessarily in the same vein, so go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. If I skip anything.
Hello?
Yep. Hi, Millie, we're still
Oh.
here.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
I'm just
I heard
wondering what
ding
you-
and it went quiet.
okay.
Oh, no, go ahead, Amy, go
Oh.
ahead. Finish. I don't want to interrupt your flow. Go ahead.
Okay, well, he just had other, for number 13 down lower, originally Anthony had brought up internally illuminated signs. And then I added, because of our downtown revitalization, Shrewsbury is having a downtown revitalization and they updated all their bylaws for a downtown district. And they added internally illuminated signs and any kind sign made of plastic or vinyl. And Attorney Dineski didn't think we should use sign material, so I will take it out. I don't mind taking it out, but I might reach out to Shrewsbury too and ask them, you know, why they put it in there and if it's upholdable, you know.
Okay.
And then I guess we have to have a discussion about the LED rope string and strip lighting. Attorney Dineski said it was very subjective. And again, that's in a lot of other towns. So I could ask them, you know, how.
Yeah, so this is the one, oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, you can ask. This is number 14, LED rope
Yep.
string lighting, strip lighting.
Yeah, so we had asked, the question was, and I'm not sure he answered it necessarily, except to
Right.
make a comment. We had asked, how can we, the essence of this is to make sure we don't have distracting lighting that's a distraction or just over the top, but not necessarily take away from businesses that are trying to put out the lights on their deck or things like that. So we had asked for him to weigh in on the language that would work. So that would definitely be a follow-up there. But then also now I see his comment about promotion being the language of that, whether that, how could you know what somebody's motivation was?
Right. Question for Bob on this. I mean, we can put a better, tighter definition around what an LED rope light is. Could we also, like we do with the EMCs, could we use a like a lux rating or a light meter to determine if it's too bright or not, the same way you would do with an EMC?
You can do anything you want, but you're gonna have to tell me how to measure it.
So I noticed there's a rating, and I'd have to find it. It's like 0.3 candles, something. I mean, could we use that same measurement for the LED lights?
Possibly.
Would they ever be that bright though? I feel like, I don't know. Well, maybe not. Maybe that is a good, maybe, wait, the difference between, I'm just reading that section now. Well, that's just talking about a brightness level to be adjusted, but Anthony, you're suggesting that if it's over a certain amount, it just wouldn't be allowed.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think the question, at least from previous meetings, was what exactly is an LED light? And so, you know, if you look this up, you can just say if it's LED lights that are encased in a PVC jacket, and then if they exceed, and for example, on the EMCs, you've got 3/10 foot candles above ambient lights. So, and I don't know how, I mean, I don't know how that make that measurement, but I'm guessing Bob does.
Okay, so is that a follow-up question?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know if it's a question for Attorney Dineski though, right? Is it more a question for Bob? Anthony or?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bob would be enforcing, so he'd certainly like his input.
In your opinion, Bob, would something like that help? So I think you've heard us talk about this a little bit, and the spirit is not to like tear down everybody's lights. Do you see a way that we could do that would just not, you know, try to be within the spirit of what we're trying to get at without being overly restrictive by using whether what Anthony suggested or some other type model that could help us do that?
Again, I have not seen that procedure done. I don't know how those procedures are actually enforced. I mean, as Amy said, you know, there are probably several towns that have that requirement. But, you know, the question is there any history of any of these bylaws being enforced, and how was it handled and how was it measured? You know, I'd like to know how it's measured, because I'm not a lighting scientist. I have a meter for the, you know, for the EMCs and that sort of thing. And, you know, but, you know, how would you measure, is rope lighting too much or not? I don't know. You know, you talk about LED lighting, there's more than one type. You know, there's one type where there's LEDs encased in a PVC sleeve. And then there's LED lights, you know, like at a restaurant, you know, for outdoor dining at night. It's just a string of lights and you plug in an LED incandescent style, but it's an LED light. How do you want to deal with that? Is that going to be a distraction that on Route 9 if the Casa Vallarta puts up a whole bunch of those lights outside at night? And how would I enforce that?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was specifically saying if you just made the definition encased in PVC jacket.
You want me to reach out to the other planners like I did for the brewery? The same ones I think have the same section and ask, have they ever had to enforce it? How it's measured and how it's enforced?
I would recommend you reach out to the zoning enforcement officers in that town, in those towns.
Oh, okay.
Because they're the ones who are actually dealing with these bylaws. Okay.
Mhm.
You know, like I said, I've not heard of any stories or anything about, you know, like I said, whether a sign is 65 versus 35% damaged, an LED that's too bright, you know, I mean, for an EMC sign, yeah, that certainly happens. I hear about that very rarely. But in terms of having, you know, LED rope lighting and is it distractive? You know, I think it's very, very hard to quantify, you know, and I think it almost has to be kind of a judgment call, you know, which, you know, I think that presents its own set of issues.
Okay. All right. So we have a couple of outstanding ones there. Other things Amy threw here to point out?
Not really. I think I will clean up a lot of the comments he had and the changes, suggestions. Under E, construction and maintenance of signs. There was a section 3 about structural elements and about removing within 30 days. And he had a comment about a case and he just had questions about it. And I wasn't really married to this section. I just took it because of a lot of other towns had it. But if he doesn't feel comfortable with it, you know, I'll just delete it. If there are a couple sections in here that I might just delete, and then I'll just send it out to everybody again.
Okay.
And if somebody wants, I can reach out to the building enforcement officers or zoning enforcement officers and ask them if they've ever had to enforce the section about the LED rope.
I mean, if
And-
you have time and you don't mind, I don't want to give you an extra assignment, but it would be interesting to see, like, if these bylaws are in place, how are other towns dealing with it? Or
Right.
they said it's never come up, so there's no problem. It would be interesting, but.
I
don't
do
wanna-
notice in a lot of other towns too, they mention with illumination, it has to be a white light. So maybe the LED rope and string lighting isn't as bad unless it's colored and flashing, or maybe it depends on the zone that it's in. Like if you're doing downtown revitalization, you might not want like circus lights, but on Route 9, it might not matter. Those are just things, but I'll reach out to the other towns.
Okay. Anything else on this one?
No,
Okay, I'm just scrolling through. Any other board members have something on this one? Comments wise or?
No.
Okay. Oh, that was a comment from you. I mean, I'm just finishing the last page. Okay. Okay, great. Let's see. We also had a question. So there was something for rezoning for 37 South. So we just asked a question about whether or not that would be considered spot zoning. So the comment there was that because the rezoning is being proposed to proposed to address a previous omission from a prior zoning map amendment, he didn't see a spot zoning issue. I don't, to what extent it was, we never got to the bottom of the original omission, so I guess we assume it was a mistake. Any thoughts on that, whether or not we have issue with that as spot zoning, or we feel okay about it?
I'm good to move forward with this one.
Okay. Any other, Millie or Amy, anything from you?
I'm good with it.
Okay.
I think it was a
And then I
mistake.
think he might have made a couple of tweaks. He reviewed the bylaw itself and I think made a tweak. Very minor tweak. So just helping with the language there. So nothing substantial on that. So I think we're good for that one. We also had the cleanup, the housekeeping bylaw about, I think there was duplexes and listed in the site plan, or it was basically housekeeping. And I think he added some additional information to what was already written. So again, looks like just clarifying the bylaw. Any questions or comments? Did everyone have a chance to see his edits on that one?
Nothing.
All right, so that one looks good. Okay, let's see. We also have, enforcement. Amy, for enforcement, any follow-up for that one?
Not really, like he had some changes. So I was gonna go forth with his changes.
Okay,
I don't know if everybody had time to read it. He crossed out some lines and added some words. But
okay. Do we have follow-up questions on that or just adopting changes?
yeah, I was just gonna adopt his changes.
Okay. All right, Fred, nothing for the the floodplain.
No, the Fred plane is fine. I forwarded to town council with the document that I got from the floodplain coordinator telling me exactly what I had to do, and he is reviewing that now. It didn't go with your package of things, so the comments didn't come back with your package of things. So I'm hoping to hear from him soon, and I will have it for you as
Okay,
soon as I get it.
okay,
There's really not much editing that can go on. I took the language that they were proposing that they require for the residents to participate in the flood insurance program. So there's really not much editing that can happen other than if I missed something that I was supposed to put in there from them.
got it. Okay, all right, great. So let's see. If we have a couple of follow-up items, we'll come back one more time and then we'll plan on our public hearing to be on March 15th. Is that the next time we meet?
The next meeting's March 1st.
Oh, so not the March 1st one, but the one after that would be the 15th for the public hearing.
I just had one quick question for Fred. So the floodplain is staying exactly the same. It's just certain lines are being added. Is anything?
It's not actually the same. The floodplain bylaw consists of about 3 pages in the zoning bylaw. When I got through it, it was about 10 pages. So
Oh,
I'm adding everything that they asked me to put in there, specific references to various things, but they gave us a 40-page document outlining what should be in there, some reasoning behind why, but pretty specific about what has to go in there. So that's
okay.
off to town council along with the document, the guideline document that they sent me.
All right, thanks.
Okay. All right, so let's see. I think that covers everything for bylaws. Did I miss one? I don't think so. All right, so we have a few follow-up items, but we're nearing the end there. Next on our agenda, we have consideration of minutes. Amy, I know you had some amendments to the minutes from the 18th. Did anyone else have any amendments for the minutes from the 18th?
No.
Okay. Did everyone have a chance to review the proposed amendments to the minutes?
That was gonna be my question. Do you want me to go through line by line or did everybody read?
I didn't see her amendments. I didn't know them.
And I did not.
Okay.
So do you
All
want
right,
me to bring them up?
Sure.
Was it January 18th, you said?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. I just emailed them out last night, Millie, if you wanted to open them, but I don't know if you're getting your town email.
I'm not. I'm still having an issue with that.
Okay. So let's see, the second page.
Is that hard for you, Millie, to be able to like reconcile what edits Amy has with the minutes that you're looking at? Or because we can hold them off till the next one if you, there's only 3 of us, so we need all 3 of us to be able to, oh no, there's 4 of us,
Yeah.
so we're fine. Okay.
Most of
Yeah,
the things
no,
I did was just to put certain sentences in context. And I can go through and read them, but if you want, Millie, if it's easier, we could wait till next meeting where you have a screen like Carrie just said.
I would be more comfortable with that,
Sure,
but I don't want to hold everybody else up either.
No, it's
I'm
not,
good
yeah,
if everybody else is good, but that, and then Anthony, you would have time to read them too. I sent them out last night.
Yeah, I see them in my inbox, but
And then we
Sure.
could, it might be quicker if everybody has a chance to read them.
Okay.
all right. So we will table the minutes from 118 and 2-1. The next master plan implementation committee meeting is this week, so that's great.
Mhm.
Yep.
So we'll wait to hear more about that. Fred, any A&Rs, lot releases or bonds?
No,
Okay, any subcommittee updates?
Not really. Design review met. We're gonna start meeting once a month now, the 3rd Thursday, and we had a really good discussion at the last meeting, and we're starting to talk about the duplex guidelines, and we're gonna try to settle those. So it was our first discussion, and I thought it went really good, but that's about it.
Okay, great. Any other updates from anyone?
we did have a groundwater before the last meeting. And it was an interesting one because they were trying to create an additional lot on Lawrence Street, 40 Lawrence. And dimensionally, they could not do that. And town council, as well as Fred, had chimed in and said dimensionally it doesn't work. But they, from a groundwater perspective, it kind of checked off all the boxes. And so we kind of did acrobats to get I don't want to say decision, but basically a non-recommendation by saying we agree that from a groundwater perspective, technically it passes all the requirements, but we also understand that dimensionally it does not. And so and then in our non-recommendation, we kind of line that out, described who, chimed in, such as Fred and town council, and it was up to the granting authority to make up their decision. So we're just talking in lines of recommendations and approvals and such. And so that we spent a lot of time trying to get that right. And that was it.
That's interesting. Okay. Then the next planning board meetings that we have March 1st and we have the 15th. So we'll plan our public hearing on the 15th. I also want to note that we have a new town planner starting effective March 7th. So we have Laurie Connors joining us. So she is currently she was previously the director of land use and planning for the town of Millbury since 2004. I know that Bob and Fred and myself had a chance to meet with her and really impressed with her experience and history, especially with master planning and grant writing. And I'm really excited for her to come join. I can't wait. So we look forward to that in a few weeks. Let's see, next ZBA meeting. Any questions or comments on that?
No.
The next ZBA meeting, February 22nd. Fred, is there anything that's coming up there that interfaces with planning? Okay.
No, I believe the only thing on their agenda is that continued discussion on Lawrence Street,
Okay.
the one that Anthony was just referring to.
Okay, great. Okay, and just final note, annual town meeting scheduled for April 25th, so we will have to have our bylaws done by then. All right, great. Is there a motion, if no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second,
Okay, all in favor, Anthony,
aye.
Amy,
Hi.
Millie,